welcoming you, Gooshbagz, to the Week 10 edition of the Gooshbagz Fantasy Football League podcast. Unfortunately, it's going to be a boring one today because I was not able to get my guest on this week. So it's just me. You guys will have to listen to me all day. So it was a good week in the NFL, though. Very interesting week. There were a lot of upsets. I'm in a weekly pickem game where I try to pick all of the winners of the week, all the NFL teams that win this week, and I think I got like 3 or 4 of them right because there were just so many upsets. It was crazy, but it's good for the Packers because they're one of the few favored teams that won, and I'm excited about that. So the news in the Gooshbagz League. I think I'm going to start off with saying that I believe I'm the fantasy reaper. I've had so many people on my team get hurt or do bad after I had them, or after I had them essentially. So I drafted Davante Adams, my first pick. He got hurt. He was out for 4 or 5 weeks. I had Will Disley on my team. I picked him up after my horrible TJ Hawkinson debacle. And Will Disley is now out for the year. I traded Davante Adams for Keenan Allen, and he didn't get hurt, but he just sucks every week. And then I have George Kittle now, and he's hurt. And I had to fill in. My tight end woes are real, and my wide receiver woes are real. So I don't know what I'm gonna do. I have to piece this stuff together, because I got a tough opponent this week, and I got to make sure that I win this one because I need to get to the playoffs. So, otherwise, there weren't a lot of big news in our league this week. There weren't any trades, so I'm going to get right to the injuries, the big injuries in the NFL this week. So, the biggest injury was Devonta Freeman, who had a sprained foot. He sprained his foot early in the game, and he's possibly out for 2 weeks. Ty Johnson also got a concussion this week, so they're very thin at running back in Detroit after everybody keeps getting hurt. Carry on, Ty, they had another guy, McKissick. No, McKissick's okay, but they all keep getting hurt, so they're gonna have to try to piece something together in the backfield there. McKissick is gonna have to carry the load. Oh, yeah, Paul Perkins got hurt or released or something. I don't know. They've had a tough time. And then George Kittle didn't play this week with knee and ankle injuries, and I'm not sure the extent of those injuries. They didn't release the MRI, so I have no idea, how this is going to go. But the top scorer on this week, it was a close one for the top scorer race between Big Ben's Bathroom and the newly named Jacobs Jingleheimer Schmidt. Josh Jacobs Jingleheimer Schmidt. His name is my name too. He was able to barely eke out a victory over Big Ben's Bathroom this week with a big 3.5 points from Matt Breida, and he ended up being the top scorer of 128.4 points. So good for you, Rayo. The new name of Jacobs Jingleheimer Schmidt really helped you out, even though you didn't have that name when you played this matchup. But that's all right. You took the lead, and you're gonna get your $10 here soon. So congratulations. On to the studs of the week. So at the quarterback position, we have Lamar Jackson again at the top. He had 33.4 fantasy points. He only threw 17 passes. He was 15 for 17 with 223 passing yards and 3 touchdowns. He also had 7 rushes for 65 yards and 1 touchdown. He had a super efficient day, but even though he only had 17 pass attempts, he had a perfect passer rating on the day. He only 2 passes were incomplete, and those 3 touchdowns really helped out. He also had a fantastic touchdown run, and if you guys haven't seen it, I would highly recommend looking it up, where he looked just like me when I'm beating Benaya in Madden, essentially. So it was a big game for Lamar Jackson. He's been, the most solid fantasy quarterback. I think he's on pace to basically tie the fantasy football points numbers that Pat Mahomes put up last year. So he's been a very good quarterback, and I'm proud that I drafted him, and I'm proud that my my thoughts on him paid off. But I'm sad that I traded him. So quarterback number 2 this week was Daniel Jones. He had 30.3 fantasy points. He threw 40 times. He had 26 completions. He had 308 passing yards and 4 touchdowns. He also had 3 rushes for 20 yards. Fun fact, he also got sacked 6 times for 5 yards. But despite that, he was also the leading rusher on the team. So I don't know. Actually, I don't think they're counting these the sack yardage as their rushing yards, which I think they should, but they don't. And he ended up having 19 more rushing yards, so he had a total of 20 rushing yards. He had 19 more rushing yards than Saquon Barkley on 13 carries. Saquon Barkley had 13 carries, 1 rushing yard. So that's fun. At the running back position, the studs of the week, Derrick Henry with 32.1 fantasy points. He had 23 rushes for 188 yards and 2 touchdowns. He also had 2 catches for 3 yards. He was huge in the victory over the Chiefs this week. That's right, you heard me right. Tennessee beat Kansas City this week. It's insane. Craziness. Absolutely, this is a monstrosity of a week. Although this is what the NFL is all about. It's so much fun to see upsets like this. He's been solid the last couple weeks, Derrick Henry has, and he's been proving his running back 1 status. So good for him. Good for you, Derrick Henry. You know, not many people believed in you until last year. So the running back 2 on the week was Dalvin Cook with 27.8 fantasy points. He had 26 rushes for 97 yards and 1 touchdown. He also had 7 catches for 86 yards. So he has been a beast. He has proven this year that he can be a workhorse in the NFL and dominating the touches. He had 20 touches or more in 9 out of 10 games this year so far. So he's been fantastic. And, he's always had the label as injury prone, and I think that was just because of his big ACL injury. And then coming back from that, as many people do, you have recurring hamstring problems the next year. But it's been a year removed since that, and he's been a monster. So, running back number 3 on the week was Aaron Jones. He had 27.3 fantasy points with 13 rushes for 93 yards and 3 touchdowns. No catches this week. But he proves that he can continue to be super efficient with only half of the touches in the Packers' backfield. So that's how he was last year. That's how he is this year. He's getting more of the touches this year. Last year was more of an even time split on every game. This time he happened to break out a couple of big runs, and he got 3 touchdowns this week. So good for him, Aaron Jones. I'm proud of you. You've always been a breakout candidate for the last 2 years, and everyone was saying, "Oh, he can't do it, because they keep using split backfield." But this year, he's proved them all wrong. So I'm proud of you. On to the wide receiver category. Christian Kirk was wide receiver 1 this week. He had 34.8 fantasy points. He had 6 catches for 138 yards and 3 touchdowns. He had a huge game. He tore up an awful Tampa Bay secondary. So I think he's going to be a solid wide receiver 2 going forward. Larry Fitzgerald really isn't seeing the looks. So Christian Kirk is taking over as the wide receiver 1 in that offense, and I think he's a solid wide receiver 2 for fantasy purposes. And a surprise, Darius Slayton had 29.1 fantasy points. He had 10 catches for 121 yards and 2 touchdowns. So he stepped up with Sterling Shepard and Evan Ingram out this week. If they end up coming back, he might not be as fantasy relevant, but with them out, he's been very solid. So at the tight end position, Mark Andrews had 20.3 fantasy points. He had 6 catches for 53 yards and 2 touchdowns. He's back. After many mediocre weeks, he finally put up a 20-point game this week. And after the first 2 weeks, I believe he had 20-point games. And then, he just kind of had meh games for the last, 7 games. But he's still tight end 4 on the year, which is, telling you something about the tight end position. And then Kyle Rudolph had 17.4 fantasy points. He had 4 catches for 14 yards and 2 touchdowns and a 2-point conversion. He stole 2 1-yard touchdowns from Dalvin Cook, and it made me so mad. I didn't get to watch that game, but I was keeping track of it on my game cast. I was like, hey, they're on the 1-yard line. This is definitely going to Dalvin Cook. And it went to Kyle Rudolph. I was like, are you kidding me? Like, this is Dalvin Cook we're talking about. He needs more points. So he didn't listen to me. They threw it to Kyle Rudolph, and then they did it again. The exact same thing. On the 1-yard line, instead of running the ball with Dalvin Cook, they throw it to Kyle Rudolph. So he only had 4 catches for 14 yards. I think generally he's not – I think he only got that because Adam Thielen was out. I don't think generally he's going to be that useful as a fantasy player. On to the duds this week at the quarterback position. Jared Goff had 3.7 fantasy points. He went 22 for 41 for 243 yards, 2 interceptions, and 1 fumble. Unfortunately, he played against Pittsburgh's D this week, so he looked atrocious against them, and he probably looked bad because he barely threw it to Cooper Kupp. So I'm very mad about that. Cooper Kupp only had 4 of his 41 targets. So Jared Goff, you know what to do going forward. You guys were doing well when he threw to Cooper Kupp. And look what happened when he didn't throw to Cooper Kupp. But I think Cooper Kupp was double covered a lot of the game, and I'll get into it a little bit more later. But Aaron Rodgers was the dud number 2 on the week. He had 233 passing yards, and he also had 7 rushing yards. So he actually played a good game. Like, the Packers won, and they managed the game very well. He just didn't need to do any better because Aaron Jones got all the touchdowns for the Packers. And this is what I was talking about with Rodgers earlier in the year. Before he had his 2 or 3 huge games in a row, he's not playing worse than he used to. He still looks good. He just doesn't need to put up those insane fantasy numbers with the pieces he has around him now. With Aaron Jones breaking out, Jamal Williams doing a lot better, he doesn't need to throw for 400 yards in a game and 3 touchdowns in order for the Packers to win. So that's what's been good about this. The better defense and a very good offense. It's a much more balanced offense, and I think it works very well for the Packers. And then Drew Brees had 11.5 fantasy points. He only had 287 passing yards, and that's it. This, I think, was more disappointing than Rodgers, even though he had slightly more points. They had a surprisingly difficult time against who you would like, the Atlanta Falcons. They've previously been a cheat code. A cheat code for quarterbacks going against them. All quarterbacks have posted over 20 points against the Atlanta Falcons defense, but they've really had a tough time. Or the Saints really had a tough time playing against the Falcons, and like I said, this was a week of upsets, so the Falcons ended up beating the Saints, and Drew Brees just didn't look good on the way. At the running back position, we have David Johnson as the number 1 dud of the week. I think this is the number 1 dud overall, even over Cooper Kupp, because David Johnson had negative 0.5 fantasy points. He had 2 rushing yards on 5 rushes. He also had 1 catch for 8 yards and a fumble. So he looked atrocious in this game. I don't know if you guys saw, if you watched this game, but when he carried the ball, there was one specific play that I saw where he carried the ball, and it was a carry left. He was going outside the tackles, and he just did not want to turn right to turn upfield. It was the crazy. He looked old and slow and sluggish. I feel really bad for David Johnson. I don't think he's healthy right now. And after his fumble, Kenyon Drake kind of took over, and he looked like the better back in this one. So I don't know what's going on with David Johnson. Maybe he's not feeling the most healthy, but it's really truly kind of sad to see. And then LaShawn McCoy had 0 points. He was a healthy scratch in the game Sunday, which was very surprising. He didn't get any work. So, at the wide receiver position, Cooper Kupp was the number one dud for the wide receivers. He had 0 points. Like I said, no catches on 4 targets. And I think he got double covered most of the time by Pittsburgh's defense. They were kind of shutting down the first option, so he didn't really have a chance to do much. And then Stephon Diggs only had 3 catches for 49 yards this week, so that's what I didn't actually do the math on that. That's 6 points, 6.4 points. Dalvin Cook took over in both the rushing and the passing games this week, so Stephon Diggs was not needed. They got the win without basically all of their wide receivers, and that's just that. At the tight end position, Mike Gesicki only got 2.3 fantasy points for me. He had 3 catches for 28 yards and a fumble, so I really thought with Preston Williams out for the year, he might get a lot more looks, and he did last week, and I needed a replacement for Kittle, who was hurt this week, and it just didn't happen. I was very, very saddened by Mike Gesicki's workload this week, even though I did get the win, but I was just hoping for a little bit more. Had I gotten 3 more points, I could have won the week, so oh well. And then Cameron Brate had 0 fantasy points. He was played again for some reason this week after goosing last week as well. O.J. Howard actually had a decent game. He went like 4 for 47 and a touchdown, so Brate didn't really get looked at this week. All right, on to my matchup reactions for this week. Matchup number 1, the Scary Terries versus my tight end Ertz when I fart. Scary Terries won 125.1 points to 81.2 points. Scary Terries rely on good games from Kyler Murray, Dalvin Cook, and Baltimore's D to take down my tight end Ertz when I fart. So, the very first, the studs for the Scary Terriers were Dalvin Cook, who I talked about already. He's been a monster. Kyler Murray did very well. That makes sense because Christian Kirk went ham. Kyler Murray put up 26.8 fantasy points, and he tore apart Tampa Bay's defense for big points. And then the Baltimore defense takes advantage of a horrid Cincinnati offense to give the Scary Terries a much-needed 23 fantasy points. So that was fantastic. Actually, it wasn't much needed because they could have scored 0 and I still would have won, but that's okay. You know, I'm glad that they did well for me. I really needed that this week. So at the duds position, at the duds category, Cooper Kupp had 0 points. I talked about him. Mike Gesicki also had 2.3 points. And David Montgomery only had 6 points, which was very surprising to me because Detroit has been the worst. Like, they're number 32 against running backs this year, and David Montgomery had an opportunity to just go off, and he didn't. The Bears won anyways, but I'm very sad that David Montgomery didn't get more involved. So now the studs for my tight end Ertz when I fart. The only one I could find here was DJ Moore, DJ Moore. He had 9 receptions for 120 yards. He had 16.5 fantasy points, so he put up a good game for my tight end Ertz when I fart. Otherwise, Nick Chubb had an okay game. Travis Kelce was pretty good. He had 17 fantasy points, but the rest all had under 10 points, so that was probably frustrating. Justin Tucker had 7 points on 7 extra points, so that's fun. I bet he wishes that they, had maybe kicked a field goal every once in a while, but I guess they didn't need to. Overall, not the greatest day for my tight end Ertz when I farts team, but you just kind of have those weeks sometime. Matchup number 2, Brandon Cooks Kittlecorn versus the running Mayfields. Brandon Cooks Kittlecorn wins 110.2 points to 90.8 points. Brandon Cooks Kittlecorn had basically a slightly above average game from everyone to take down a disappointing David Johnson and the rest of the running Mayfields. So like I said, besides Christian McCaffrey, who had 23.1 fantasy points, which, by the way, I mentioned this on the chat, but That is his third lowest points on the year. They played against the Packers, who I thought Christian McCaffrey was going to tear apart the Packers. Fortunately, he did not, and they held him to his third lowest point total of the year, only behind 2 games from the same team, Tampa Bay, who is the most stout run defense in the NFL. So I'm very proud of the Packers for doing that. He still had 108 yards and a touchdown, but they were able to hold him at least a little bit in check. So everybody else just barely had over 10 points on his team, except for Michael Gallup, who he picked up from me because I dropped him for some stupid reason. I guess he hadn't been performing, and Courts really needed a spot start, so he grabbed him and played him. And he got him 15.6 fantasy points. But other than that, everybody had 10 points. Mike Williams was kind of a dud. He had 6.5 points. But it was just an average game from everybody, and it was enough to take down the running Mayfields. On the running Mayfield side, he had good games from Mark Andrews, 20.3 fantasy points, and Jameis Winston did okay. He had 18.3 fantasy points. Everybody else, and Harrison Butker, 15 fantasy points from the kicker. Everyone else was just kind of meh, and David Johnson got him negative points, so that really didn't help him out at all. Matchup number 3, Rogers Cup versus Try and Stop Me from Auto Picking. Rogers Cup wins 104.5 to 74.5 fantasy points. Despite stinkers from his stud running backs, Rogers Cup was able to win due to a woeful performance from Team Auto Pick. So the only studs on Rogers Cup was Tyreek Hill, and he had 27.5 fantasy points. This is a similar, and San Francisco's defense, who had a touchdown, and they got 19 fantasy points. So that really helped him out. Other than that, it was kind of similar to Courts' team this week, similar to Brandon Cook's Kittlecorn. He just kind of had, regular games, and, didn't really, nothing big, nothing bad, except Saquon had 5.6 fantasy points, 13 rushes for a yard, and Zeke only had 7.3 fantasy points. So I'm sure that was frustrating for him. Aaron Rodgers only had 10 fantasy points, but it was more than enough to take down Trying to Stop Me from Auto Picking. Now the studs on Trying to Stop Me from Auto Picking, Golden Tate had 21.5 fantasy points, so that was a great day. He had four catches for 95 yards and 2 touchdowns. He had the Goose from LaShawn McCoy, and 10 points from Jimmy Garoppolo, and 3 points from the New Orleans defense. Emmanuel Sanders had 3.4 points, so he had a few rough games from his team, so that didn't really work out in his favor this week. Matchup number 4, the line that never hit you, I did not, versus Mix and Mac. Zerline, I never hit you, won 110.9 points to 96.4 points. Now, Derrick Henry and Melvin Gordon propelled Zerline, I never hit you to victory over a waning Mix and Mac. Derrick Henry and Melvin Gordon had fantastic games this week for Zerline, I never hit you. They had Derrick Henry had 32.1 fantasy points. I talked about him. He had almost 200 yards total in the game and 2 touchdowns. And then Melvin Gordon had 108 yards and a touchdown. He had 19.8 fantasy points, so that was really good for him too. And other than that, Russell Wilson had 16 fantasy points. The duds on his team, Darren Waller had 5.5. The Kansas City defense had 4. Zerline had 3. So he was kind of carried by his two running backs to not eke out a victory because he won by 14, but he got those 2 studs really helped him out this week. And Mix and Mac, his one stud, was Lamar Jackson with 33.4 fantasy points. Now usually someone scoring 33.4 fantasy points for you would really help your team get that victory. But due to stinkers from Cameron Brate and the Minnesota's defense against Dallas, he wasn't able to put up enough points this week to to take out Zerline Never Hit You. And actually, I was looking down on the benches here, and I saw negative numbers, and I didn't realize that Rashad Penny only had 2 rushing yards and a fumble. So that's good. Negative 1.8 fantasy points. So that's always a good thing to have. And then matchup number 5, Carry. Oh no, it's not Carry on My Wayward Son anymore. I put it in here before you changed your name. Josh Jacobs Jingleheimer Schmidt. His name is my name too. Versus Big Ben's Bathroom. Josh Jacobs Jingleheimer Schmidt won 128.4 to 128.2 fantasy points. This game was decided by 0.2. What an insane day. Josh Jacobs Jingleheimer Schmidt ekes out a victory on the back of Christian Kirk and a big 3.5 points from Matt Breida on Monday night. Now, technically, he should be in the duds category for Josh Jacobs Jingleheimer Schmidt because he only had 3.5 fantasy points. But that was all he needed for a victory over Big Ben's Bathroom this week. So I'm not putting him in the duds category. And he had a good game from Ronald Jones this week. He had a good big game from Christian Kirk this week. So he was able to put up some monster numbers and be able to take home the title of Week 10 highest scorer. So I'm proud of you, Rayo. And you also broke the curse of facing Big Ben's Bathroom and scoring like 70 points. So good for you. On to Big Ben's Bathroom. He had big games from Aaron Jones. Michael Thomas had 21.7 fantasy points. He had 13 receptions for 152 yards. And then Amari Cooper had 26.2 fantasy points. He had 11 receptions for 147 yards and a touchdown. So he looked really good this week. And in the duds category for his team, Drew Brees, which was kind of disappointing. Chris Herndon had 1 catch for 7 yards, and that is the end of his not career, but the end of his season, essentially. He has broken ribs or something. And, so Josh Jacobs Jingleheimer Schmidt was able to take him down for the victory, a much-needed victory this week. Also, R.I.P. Carry on my wayward son. That's the last time you're going to hear it this year. So, feel sad. It'll be that way until Carry On is back in the league and not injured. So, now on to my favorite segment, the waiver wire team that could kick all of our asses. The quarterback on this team is Daniel Jones with 30.3 fantasy points. The running back 1, Brian Hill with 13.6 fantasy points. Quarterback 2, Tariq Cohen with 11.7 fantasy points. The wide receiver 1 on this team would be Darius Slayton with 29.1 points. Wide receiver 2 is Randall Cobb, throwback, Packers guy, now Dallas guy, 19.6 fantasy points. Tight end would be Kyle Rudolph with 17.4 fantasy points. The flex would be Jamison Crowder with 16.6 fantasy points. The defense/special teams would be the Rams defense. They had 20 points. And then the kicker, my favorite kicker in the league now, Young Ho Koo. Young Ho. What a name. Young Ho Koo. 15 fantasy points. This would have put up 173.3 fantasy points, outscoring us by at least everybody, by almost 50 points. So that is a big week from the waiver wire. It's up there. I think that's probably the second highest waiver wire team that we've had this year. So that's exciting. Now, on for matchup predictions for next year. Ooh, no, just for week 11. I was 4 for 5 in week 10, so boom, killed it. This week I'm going for 5 for 5. Rayo was 3 for 5 last week, so suck it, Rayo. Suck it. I beat you once again. Not only on the fantasy field, but also on the predictive matchup field. How does it feel? It should feel bad. But anyway, matchup predictions for Week 11. Matchup number 1, the Scary Terrys versus Big Ben's Bathroom. The projected winner is Scary Terrys. Taking advantage of an Aaron Jones bye, the Scary Terrys will once again break the curse of low-scoring teams versus Big Ben's Bathroom. They're going to continue the tradition of outscoring Big Ben's Bathroom. Matchup number 2, the Running Mayfields versus Rogers Cup. Projected winner, due to a bye-pocalypse on Rogers Cup, the Running Mayfields will they will destroy Rogers Cup this week and get themselves back into the race. Matchup number 3, Mix and Mac versus my tight end hurts when I fart. The projected winner is Mix and Mac. The Lamar Jacksons, that's what I'm going to call you from now on. The Lamar Jacksons will lead Mix and Mac to victory over my tight end hurts when I fart. Matchup number 4, Zerline, I never hit you, I did not, versus Brandon Cooks Kittlecorn. The projected winner, Brandon Cooks Kittlecorn. Zerline, I never hit you, won't be able to overcome bias from Russell Wilson and Derrick Henry and will unfortunately lose to Brandon Cooks Kittlecorn. Matchup number 5, Try and Stop Me from Auto Picking versus Josh Jacobs Jingleheimer Schmidt. Projected winner is Josh Jacobs Jingleheimer Schmidt. In a low-scoring affair, Josh Jacobs Jingleheimer Schmidt will once again barely defeat his opponent. Now, I have no questions this week because I didn't actually ask you guys for questions, but you guys are always welcome to submit questions during any time in the week. I've been busy this week, so unfortunately I didn't get around to it, but I guess we're moving on to week 11 then. So good luck this week, you choke bags, and goodbye.